What's up? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of Pushing the Pile, brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. A very special edition because no one wanted to hop on and join me today. It's just me, Mike Renner. I'm doing Pete Prisco's post-draft power rankings today, and Pete was scared to compete, wouldn't come on the show. Kyle doing his off-season thing as usual, so it's just me going through a lot of my thoughts on the NFL draft, some thoughts on Pete's initial power rankings, some superlatives from this draft at the end. Obviously, draft analysts, my previous profession, yikes. We will be diving deep into all things draft. And I want to start with just some thoughts on this 2025 draft. Just some stories that have been going around because there came down punishment today from the draft prank calls. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to start with some things that really struck me from over the weekend that I want to hammer home. So some things that really will resonate with me. And then I look back on this 2025 draft, I will remember. And I want to start with this. Mel Kiper was out of his gourd this weekend. Like truly, it was Mel Kiper is a legend. Mel Kiper, I have him to thank for this. You know, if he isn't who he was, I would not probably be here right now. Watching the draft on Saturdays growing up are some of my fondest memories. Obviously, it was Saturdays back then before they moved it to Thursday. I would sit there all weekend long, every single pick. It's how I got my love of this. He is very much responsible for that. But I think he is missing something in terms of his social relationship identifying properties, or whatever you want to call it. It was missing in his conversations on what the heck was going on with Shedeur Sanders over the course of the weekend. The fact that they could not stop talking about it. It was honestly doing a disservice to Shedeur. I feel bad for him because a big portion of why teams are, why I think teams were passing on him is the media reaction to it. It is how this whole conversation around him is so hyper partisan. The overexposure polarizes fan bases, polarizes everyone. It's like, to me, it's like when, JJ Watt talked about this when he was with the Texans and when he had that, player of the year season, and then he was on every commercial the next offseason. And even if you like JJ Watt, seeing his face every time you went to break, you started to be like, I don't really like JJ Watt that much anymore. I don't want to see him every time it's a commercial break. That's how it gets when you have someone like a Shedeur Sanders, who love him or hate him. If you're seeing him 24/7 for the draft coverage over the draft weekend, your thoughts on him are going to get hyper polarized. You're either going to love him and try to protect him at all costs, or you're going to be rooting for his fall to continue into the fifth round. So it just is not doing him any favors. So to keep harping on the coverage the way they did, I thought was just, they got to go back to the drawing board. We did it with Tim Tebow. We've done it with other hyperpolarizing prospects, players in the past. And I think every single time, it's just unfair to these guys. They don't ask for it. It doesn't do them any favors. Yeah, they say no publicity is bad publicity. This is not where we should be in the sports conversation world. This is not where I want to be. I don't want to be focusing on one guy the way we have been this past week. I just think it's wrong. So that is obviously something that's got to be remembered for. I will remember it being in Green Bay, Clay Matthews claiming the Bears still suck, all that. But then I want to share one other memory from over the weekend that I really loved. I was on the Bleacher Report draft show Thursday night, and if you saw the viral clip, it was everywhere. Tyler Booker, the Alabama guard, joined us on the show. Micah Parsons, obviously his teammate, was next to me. And he went on this diatribe speech, whatever you want to call it. When Adam Lethko asked him about, you said your favorite part of football is seeing the love of the game leave a guy's eyes. And, he talked about how it's a kid's game and that, one of the biggest things is that, we do this for free. We would do it for the love of the game. And when it's the third and fourth quarter, and I've been, pancaking guys all day, hitting them after the whistle, really going to town on them. And I start to see them want to sub out and want to leave. And just like the way he described it with such passion is one of those things that just reminded me that we in the media have this big information gap, that we don't get to see what these guys are like on a football field. We don't get to see what these guys are like in a locker room. We don't get to have long form discussions about X's and O's with these players and how detail oriented they are and who they are as people. We more often than not are basing our evaluations, basing our, draft boards where we rank these guys off of what we saw in film and what we saw in 45 minutes of perusing, sometimes, TV copies for some people, all 22 for other, but like, we really don't have the information that NFL teams do. And so if you're criticizing Tyler Booker going 12th overall and you're a Cowboys fan, I would suggest watching that clip and seeing a player who is going to be in a locker room an amazing teammate, a hard worker, like everything you could possibly want. And it's something that we just don't get to as outside people, as fans, as evaluators, don't get that information. And it's something that matters a ton. If you've played sports at any level, and unfortunately didn't get to have Kyle Long on this because he could speak to it, but locker room dynamic is something that I think gets way underrated in the draft conversation. That, we just do not. Why does the guy fall? Why is this XYZ guy falling? A lot of the times it's because a lot of teams don't want to add that personality, not necessarily that on-field football player, but that personality to a locker room. Because NFL is unique in that it is 53 guys. It is a lot of people that have to be rowing in the same direction. This isn't like the NBA where you can get one guy who's kind of off on his own doing whatever and make it work. You need every single player on every single play to have the exact same idea. It really is something that I think needs to get discussed more. And, I think a lot of people hate anonymous scout quotes, but I think they're very enlightening and will be very enlightening in the NIL era, because you'll see more and more guys that aren't in it for, quote unquote, the right reasons, who are going to be people that teams don't want to add to their locker room because of whatever they've heard intel wise, or whatever they've heard in interviews, or whatever they've said. That will become a more common theme, in my opinion, in the years to come. And so when you can get a guy like Tyler Booker, the Alabama guard, who is going to do everything right, who is going to play the game for all the right reasons, who is going to be the teammate you want, I don't think those are reaches. You can call it a reach if you want. It's those personality matters. And that was one thing that I will remember this draft for. The last thing I want to touch on here, I guess let's two more things before we get to Pete's power rankings. One is that the quarterback position is not like other positions in the draft. A lot of people wanted to look at Shedeur Sanders or other guys' sort of draft board ranks, consensus board, he was 22nd, and say, oh man, how did he fall to pick 144? And I feel like we have a very close corollary to this. Maybe not the exact corollary, but 2022, Sam Howell, North Carolina quarterback, he was 46th on the consensus board. Another guy who a lot of people said tools to like, but he's probably a second round quarterback for a lot of people. Second round quarterback, though, is just not a thing. Quarterback position is treated differently by NFL teams. There are certain teams that would take it. There are most teams that just won't even address the position until the fourth round. Don't care if Cam Ward fell to pick 11. Pick 12, Dallas Cowboys were still drafting still weren't drafting Dak Prescott's backup. They just that's how it works. So when a guy falls, like Sam Howell did just a few years ago, sometimes he falls a lot. Sam Howell actually ironically got drafted to the exact same position Shedeur Sanders did, 144 overall. So it is just a position that should not really have the same sort of expectations of, oh man, he falls to the third. Why don't the 49ers just take him? Why don't some other team just take him? It's great value. He was 22nd player on draft boards. That's just kind of not how the quarterback conversation works. All right, and then the final thing which I saw earlier this morning. And I have tried as little as possible to care about this story. But now that there's actual punishment being handed down for the prank call story, I guess I have to care a little bit about the fact that Shedeur Sanders was one of, I guess, many prospects that was prank called over the weekend. Not sure if they were all from Jeff Ulbrich, defense coordinator for the Falcons' son, but this one for sure was. They filmed it, first mistake, and then obviously posted on the internet, second mistake for Jax Ulbrich there. But the Falcons got fined $250,000. Defense coordinator Jeff Ulbrich, $100,000 himself, which, dude, Jax, if I was a 21-year-old kid and I got my dad fined $100,000, whew, I would not, I would be skipping, I would not be coming home fall break. I would not be coming home. I guess it's on summer break right now, but I would be stressed. I don't know how that conversation went at the Ulbrich family dinner table, but that's a toughie. So $250,000. Now you can call this an overreaction or whatever. Again, I think with the storyline that was Shedeur Sanders over the course of the weekend, the NFL was obviously going to do something about this to try to prevent just leaks. You obviously don't want things like this happening. To me, it's not the biggest deal. This is a college kid. I remember pranking my friends in college when I figured out there was an app that you could spoof other people's numbers. Not the coolest thing I did, but I think it's funny when it's your friends. It's not funny when it's someone that you don't know. I think it's a little more mean-spirited when it's somebody you don't know. But to me, this got way blown out of proportion. But hopefully we can put it to bed now that punishment has been handed down. All right, those are my final draft takes. We'll get to some superlatives at the end of the show. But after the break, we're getting to Pete Prisco's power rankings, going who's too high, who's too low, and who's just right. Our famous Goldilocks segment coming up next.
Get ready.
Wait a second. I thought we were going tubing.
All 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and Knuckles are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
And everyone loves it.
Every adventure,
Just try to keep up.
every face-off,
This ends now.
and every moment that will have you saying,
Where have you been? My entire life!
It's showtime.
all 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and the entire Sonic universe are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
All right, Pete Prisco, the power ranking czar here at CBS, released his post-draft power rankings for this upcoming season. Obviously, during the season, we do our Goldilocks segment, who's too high, who's too low, who's just right. Usually it's me and Kyle picking it apart, but this one's just going to be me. So I thought I'd do 3 teams, who's too high, 3 teams of who's too low, and then 3 teams of who's just right. Let me read through the top 10 for you guys first, and then we'll get to those rankings of who's too high, who's too low, and who's just right. Starts off, Eagles, Chiefs. No surprise here. No reason to really change it at this point. I don't think there's been such a big exodus from either, even if I would say both are a little more susceptible given their off seasons. I think both have taken a hit from where they were a year ago. Then you have the Bills at 3, Lions 4, Ravens 5, Commanders 6, Packers 7, Rams 8, Bucks 9, Chargers 10. Your bottom 5. We have the Raiders at 28, Browns 29, Giants at 30, Saints at 31, and then the Titans taking it. I was about to say something that I probably shouldn't have said, but taking it at 32. Man, I didn't include the Giants in who's too low, but I think the Giants are too low at 30. I don't think they're going to be. I loved what they did this offseason, truthfully. One of my favorite off seasons. I didn't put them in this because I wanted to focus on some other teams, but I just wanted to get that out of the way before we get into this. All right, who's too high? I'm going to start at the top and work down with who I had. I thought the Rams at 8 is a little too high for me. Just considering who's behind them. I'm not saying they're a bad team. I think they are probably, still put them as the class of the NFC West. I just think 8 when you're ahead of the Buccaneers, who I think got better this offseason, ahead of the Broncos, who I think got better, ahead of the Vikings at 13. I'd probably put them behind all of those teams. So that's a little too high for me. And I worry about this secondary. I know they do everything in their power. If you watch this defense on the All-22, they play the least amount of man coverage in the NFL. They treat their corners like glorified linebackers with the zones they have them covered. They're running back deep into coverage. Like, it's a uniquely set up defense to protect those corners. But their corners are still a 32-year-old Darius Williams, a 30-year-old Ahkello Witherspoon, and then Quentin Lake. It's a bottom 3 group in the NFL. We're just ranking up cornerback groups. And again, they protect them very well. They get a lot of run out of their defensive line, but I worry about that. And then I just worry about age offensively. Your star quarterback's 37. Your star wide receiver in Devontae Adams, they just signed, is 32. Your right tackle is 33 in Rob Havenstein. And then your sort of second wave, your backups, you don't have the depth that you did last year along the offensive line. It is just that first starting unit. And if anyone goes down, and a lot of guys went down last year, I just worry about how thin they are up front. So for all those reasons, Rams are a good team. I just don't think they're the 8th best team in the NFL. Next team up, Atlanta Falcons. 16. They come in at Pete Prisco's power rankings. I think that's I can be talked into that, but I have serious question marks about where they got better. I know the quarterback position, Michael Penix Jr., like that should be a lot better than it was with Kirk Cousins. But I thought they kind of got lucky to win as many games as they did with Kirk Cousins last year. Like they got by in the seat of their pants a number of times to eke out games, specifically against the Bucs last season, where they took both those matchups. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. And I just worry wholeheartedly that this might be the worst defensive line in the NFL. You know, it's been that way for forever, but you're relying on 2 rookie first rounders to make an impact. Your defensive line of Rook, Orororo, David Onyemata, Jalen Walker, James Pierce. I guess Leonard Floyd you can throw in there too, but at this point in his career, he has not been an impact pass rusher in years. Maybe Arnold Ebiketie takes a step forward. Maybe Braylon Trice takes a step forward. Sure, you have names, you have guys in that edge room to have potential. I don't see it on the interior, though, and you do not have depth on the interior. And it's like if no one takes a big step forward, and if it is those 2 rookies, like if your defensive line last year, if you're relying on Laiatu Latu and Dallas Turner, who I thought were better prospects than Jalen Walker and James Pierce, the first 2 edge rushers off the board in last year's draft class. If you were relying on them to anchor your pass rush, you had a bad pass rush last year. It is difficult to be an impact pass rusher as a rookie in the NFL. The gap from college to NFL in terms of offensive tackle play is massive. You can get by being an athlete in college. You have to have a bag to get by in the NFL. I have not seen that from Pierce or Walker just yet, so I do not feel comfortable saying that they will be impact guys. So we'll see. But then also on the flip side, and again, I think Michael Penix Jr. is going to be a massive upgrade. But up front, you lost Drew Dahlman. You didn't add anyone to this offensive line. And yeah, he didn't play most of last season with Ryan Nizzle at center. But now it's like if Ryan Nizzle goes out, who steps in for him or anyone else along that offensive line? You're just so thin that I think you're playing with fire there a little bit. 16, because of that, is just a touch too high. My last team that's too high before we get to who's too low, Miami Dolphins. Producer Harry was, I would say, none too pleased to hear this. We had a little text back and forth about it, but he's kind of like, it kind of seemed like he just knows that the writing is on the wall with this team and where they're going, unfortunately. And yeah, 24, like if they stay fully healthy and everything goes right, like I could very well be wrong about this. Their offense still should be very good. If Tyreek looks like old Tyreek, if Waddle's there, like there's no reason that the offense can't put up a lot of points still. I just have massive concerns about this defense. One, you might have the worst secondary in the NFL. If you trade Jalen Ramsey, if he's gone, your starters at corner are Storm Duck, Cam Smith, Kader Kohu. I like Kader Kohu. I like Cam Smith coming out. At no point does that cornerback trio strike any fear in opponents. And then your safety group is Ashton Davis and Ifeatu Melifonwu, 2 kind of also rans that the Jets and Lions were completely fine to get rid of this offseason. It's not an inspiring group. And then your edge group, now Chop Robinson, I think, is going to take a big step forward. I have full confidence in him being an impact guy. But with Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb's injury histories at this point, I think getting anything from them is a plus. I do not think you can chalk up any sort of production from either of those two coming off of Achilles, ACLs, all that. It's not great. And then obviously then you have the concern that is their offensive line, that you're banking on Jonas Avinaya being a day one competent starter at right guard, that you're banking on Patrick Paul, last year's second rounder, being a competent replacement to Teron Armstead. And then you're banking on Tua Tagovailoa going through a full season healthy. There's just so many things up in the air here for this Dolphins team that, and you just became so thin at so many different positions that I could see this team bottoming out, unfortunately, this season. Who's too low? We'll start off with a team that I think has added more talent this offseason than anyone else in the NFL. And yet they're still ranked at number 22. It's the New England Patriots. I think for so many reasons they're too low. But the biggest of which is this is just not the same team. It's a completely different team than what we saw last year. You added Carlton Davis, Robert Spillane, Milton Williams, Harold Landry to this defense. To the offense, you add Stephon Diggs, Morgan Moses, Garrett Bradbury. And then not to mention that in the draft where you added Will Campbell at left tackle, Travion Henderson at running back, Kyle Williams at wide receiver, Craig Woodson at safety, Josh Farmer at DT, Braden Swinson off the edge. Like there is so many guys that can be from this rookie draft class that can be impact day one starters. And then from your free agent class that should be impact starters. That's like, you almost can throw out last year with a different coaching staff with completely different talent. And then, oh, by the way, Drake May going from year one to year two, which is traditionally the biggest leap a quarterback takes in his career. All of those reasons, I think not only are the Patriots better than the 22nd best team, I think they're a playoff team this upcoming season. I think a massive turnaround is in store. It really kind of hinges on this offensive line. But they hit all the needs. They hit all the right notes. Like this is a team that you look up and down and you're like, all of a sudden, oh shoot, this is good. Like this is not the same team that was walking through that door last year. And again, Mike Vrabel and his track record would give me good reason to think that a quick turnaround's in store. So 22, no, I think they're a lot better than that. Even if, 4-13 a year ago, I think this is a 10-win team this upcoming season. I really do. Next one up, Arizona Cardinals, who check in at number 20 on these rankings. Talk about a turnaround in terms of talent. The Cardinals, beginning of last season, I think had the worst defensive line in the NFL. Your best pass rusher was Dennis Gardeck. It was so bad that you moved Zaven Collins, an off-ball linebacker you drafted in the first round. You moved him to the edge, right? It was awful. And you had your first rounder, Darius Robinson, didn't play. He came in with an injury. There just was no talent walking through that door. That has changed. And probably in the biggest way I've ever seen in a one-year turnaround in terms of what they had week one to what they're going to have week one now. Guys that weren't on their week one that are now. Baron Browning, who they traded for midseason from Denver and then re-signed. Darius Robinson, who obviously was your first rounder who was injured. Dalvin Tomlinson on the interior defensive tackle. Calais Campbell, interior defensive tackle. Walter Nolan. Josh Sweat. BJ Ojolari, who was injured last year. Jordan Birch, your third rounder. They're so much better. I mean, this looks like kind of similar to what Jonathan Gannon had when he was in Philadelphia, where you had just second wave, third wave. It's not to say you have elite guys in this room. I don't think I'd put any of these guys in the top 10 of their respective positions, but you might have a bunch of guys who are top 30. You may very well have a lot of quality in this Cardinals defensive line that just, when you have four across of all guys that can win one-on-ones, that's what makes it tough on offense. You can't have a weak link then. And then that way you can just rush four. So the days of going blitz heavy, scheming it up for Jonathan Gannon, I think that's turned around. And then offensively, they didn't really add much. I think this is pretty status quo from where they were a year ago. But that was a young receiving core. It was the first and second year wideout were your top two options, Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. years 2 and years 3 for those guys could look better. Kyler Murray, year 2 with Marvin Harrison Jr. should be better, should be on the same page more. I don't know. I think there's a lot of reason to get excited about this Cardinals team being better than the 8-9 team they were a year ago. And then lastly, I'm going to go up to all the way to number 11. I think this is a top 10 team through and through. And if I'm the rest of the AFC, I am terrified of this team as the Denver Broncos. They were, a year ago, the best defense in the NFL in terms of EPA per play. Better than the Eagles, better than the Vikings. They had the defensive player of the year, Pat Surtain. They had a top 3 pass rush in terms of pressures. They added to that Jahdae Barron, Talanoa Hufanga, and Dre Greenlaw. A corner, a safety, and a linebacker. Because the one place they were susceptible was their run defense. So it added a great run defender in the slot, a great run defender at safety, and a great run defender at second level at linebacker. There is reason to think that this defense could very well look like, what the Eagles defense looked like down the stretch. Just suffocating. And then you factor into that, they added a lead back with home run hitting ability. And Bo Nix year 2. He will be better. Rookie to year 2, the biggest jump any quarterback makes. All those things for a team that was 10-7 already a year ago. A blocked field goal from going 11-7, beating the Chiefs. I think this is a top 10 team. I would put them at least above the Chargers. I think the Chargers took a step back from a talent perspective. I think the Broncos are taking a step forward, and I'd be very afraid if I was the rest of the AFC. All right, who's just right? 3 teams. We don't have to spend too long on them because obviously I'm agreeing with Pete, so I don't want to spend too long on them. But I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at number 9 as just right. This is a team, maybe not even just right. I said I'd put them above the Rams, but this is a firm top 10 team that Jason Light, you just have to give him his flowers as one of the best GMs in the NFL. Every single year continues to maintain, bringing back Chris Godwin to this receiving core, adding Emeka Egbuka to the draft. Yeah, you lost Liam Cohen. That's going to hurt. But it's almost like you foolproofed it by getting in Emeka Egbuka, where now you go 6 deep at receiver of quality options. You just can funnel those guys in and out. If Chris Godwin goes down, if he's not fully healthy, it ain't no problem. You have a top 5 offensive line in the NFL. You have Bucky Irving running behind it, who was so dynamic. And I think now that you go into the season knowing who he is, you can do a lot more with him than kind of going into last season thinking Rachaad White was your guy. No, you scheme this, you make this offense, you create around Bucky Irving now and what he's capable of. And then you add it to your defensive line, Hassan Reddick, David Walker, Elijah Roberts in the draft. I think there's reason to believe this defensive line could take a big step forward. I still worry about the linebacking core. Levante David, at 35 years old, can he keep going? Who knows? We'll see. But I do think that this Bucs team is the real deal. Just from a talent perspective, they are the real deal. The next one I want to hit on here, we'll go down the board. 18, Dallas Cowboys. I actually thought for a second to put them too high, but this is where they are, and it's still the outside looking in. That's why I just can't believe their offseason. That was about as status quo in offseason as you can get in a division where it's an arms race at this point. You saw what the Giants did this offseason. You saw what the Commanders did this offseason. And the Commanders were already a better team. And obviously they're in a different cap situation, but the Cowboys didn't take a step forward. They were a 7-10 team a year ago. They are staring dead in the face 7-10 again. This is a team that has holes. This is a team that does not have weapons outside of CeeDee Lamb. And it's a team that unfortunately just isn't that good on paper and doesn't have a head coach that's going to inspire me as an offensive mind that's going to really innovate in a way to get this team play above their talent level. So they weren't a playoff team a year ago. Coming in at 18 here, I just would be floored if they get their way in the playoffs. It's the division got harder. Didn't get easier. It got harder in the NFC East. Last team, number 3 on the teams ranked just right, Tennessee Titans. Unfortunately, they still have the worst roster in the NFL. This was the cupboard that John Robinson left with his just utter disastrous drafts. After they got that number 1 seed, they just started just drafting like shit. I mean, there's no way around it. Isaiah Wilson, Caleb Farley, Traylon Burks, just not hitting. And when you go through, an entire rookie contract's worth of misses, 4 straight years of not getting production, your best pick over that span, Peter Skoronsky, a guard, who's like, an average to above average guard, but that's your best pick. What are you going to do? Like, unless you really hit on free agents, which they objectively did not last year on their spending spree, you are going to be a bad team. And they went on another spending spree this offseason. I don't know if Dan Moore is exciting me, and you're starting a rookie quarterback. So for all those reasons, the Titans are still really on the outside looking in at contending, which hurts to say because I love Cam Warden's game, but it's not as if he's, as far as number 1 overall picks go, like Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence or Bryce Young. Like, it could be Bryce Young, right? It could be Caleb Williams. It's like where I worry about is that just like there are some things to his game that need to improve. And I don't know if he's going to a situation where it's going to necessarily maximize his strengths and hide his weaknesses. I worry for this Titans team. And again, when you're starting a rookie quarterback, sometimes it's just not good right away. All right, there's your Goldilocks segment. Pete Prisco's Power Rankings. Go check them out, cbssports.com. We're going to take a quick break. After that, going to get some draft superlatives. Some biggest reaches. Who was the biggest reach? Who was the biggest steal? Weirdest draft? All those sorts of things right after this.
What's he like? The happy-faced killer?
You mean my dad? Be glad you never have to know.
You think that you're so much better than me.
You're just like your old man.
I'm not like you at all.
All right, I said it before. The biggest reach, the biggest steal, the weirdest draft, the most unpredictable draft, the most predictable draft, the draft with the most obvious plan, the best win-win trade, and the most lopsided trade. Let's kick it off with the biggest reach. I don't know. I hate starting negative. I don't know why I set it up this way, but I set it up this way. And I'm set it up, unfortunately, for producer Harry to get sad because Kenneth Grant, the Michigan defensive tackle, was ultimately the biggest reach of the first round. Now, take solace in the fact that this wasn't as big a reach as some previous first rounders. I remember as a Packers fan, when they drafted Eric Stokes, and I was like, I have Eric Stokes 80. It was like 82nd on my board. Why did they just take him? And obviously 4 years later, I'm still asking that question. Last year, Xavier Legette was like in the 90s. So this is a mini reach. It's only 13th he went. He was 46th on my board. So not huge. But I've hit this conversation home a bunch. Just nose tackle value. Look at, nose tackles the past 10 years or so in the NFL. How many guys, especially like project nose tackles, which I would throw Kenneth Grant into that mix because his tape was not like Derek Brown's or Vita Vea's coming out of college, right? Where it's like, oh, this guy was like the best player in the country or the best, like one of the best players in the country. Was he looking at the NFL? It's more like, oh no, he has to develop at the nose tackle position still. But if you look at those guys historically, it's just not a strong track record. And nose tackle value, they get hurt a lot. Their career length isn't that long. It's just one where it's hard to really get what you are expecting at 13. Whereas in this class specifically, there were so many good nose tackles. Tyreek Williams comes off the board a little bit later. Alfred Collins in the second round. Jamari Caldwell in the third round. Josh Farmer in the fourth. There was just a lot of guys who could really hold up on the nose, I thought, uniquely in this class, that you didn't need to get one at 13. Now, obviously, they threw away a third rounder to go get Jonas Savvy-Anaya, which I think is a great fit and a great pick. But you came away with a nose tackle and a guard for your first 3 round picks. And obviously, Kenneth Grant being the biggest reach on my board. Biggest steal on my board. I have Braden Swinson, the LSU defensive end, was the biggest steal. He went 146 to the New England Patriots. Another reason why I'm so high on the Patriots, because I think he's like an NFL-ready edge rusher. He was 35th on my board. The guy's tape was, he had 60 pressures in the SEC, man. He had the second highest pass rushing win rate on true pass sets. The highest in all college football last year. The highest, Abdul Carter. That's not bad company. When one guy goes 3, the other goes 146. Now, again, he's not that athlete. He's a good athlete, though. He's not a bad athlete by any means. I think he'd still win. He's got long arms. I don't know. This one didn't make sense. I think the Patriots are going to reap big rewards from that one. It was the biggest steal on my draft board. The weirdest draft. This was, everyone agrees, it was one of the weirdest drafts I can ever remember. Cleveland Browns. Now, I love what they did off the top, and we'll get to that a little later. The trade was great. I love in retrospect, you look back at Andrew Berry's comments on Travis Hunter, just like over the top praise, calling him this unbelievable, something we've never seen before. It was great showmanship from him, great salesmanship, getting teams to bite for that number 2 overall pick, thinking of how much they loved him. But the weirdest part was going quarterbacks in the 3rd round, the 5th round. I can't remember that ever happening in modern draft history. Maybe 2 times on day 3, maybe once on day 1, once on day 3. Never picks 94 and 144. I have never seen that happen. And I pray to God that we get the Cleveland Browns on Hard Knocks. There's actually a lot of great teams on Hard Knocks this year that could be Hard Knocks. If the Pittsburgh Steelers with Aaron Rodgers in that receiving room gets on Hard Knocks, the Cleveland Browns on Hard Knocks, we'll see. I cannot remember a draft that went as odd as they did, trading back from 2 to 5, then picking 2 running backs, then picking 2 quarterbacks, and then, well, it's Cleveland Browns. Most unpredictable draft. This being from a historical GM perspective, what the GMs / franchises have done historically versus what they did in this draft. And it has to be the Green Bay Packers. We did, my family every year does, obviously, couch say we are Packers fans, Packers shareholders, excuse me. And every year we do 10 guys that you think the Packers will take. Whoever gets the most wins, whatever, $10. And then the tiebreaker being whoever gets like the latest one drafted. No one in my family got a single pick this year, right? Because one, no one thought 1st round wide receiver. They hadn't done it since 2002, Javon Walker. They hadn't gone 330 plus pound tackle in the, I believe, Wolf, Thompson, Gutekunst tree, GM tree era. They just have always gone lighter tackles, lighter athletes. They went Anthony Belton, 345 pounder in the 2nd round. And then I can't remember them ever drafting like a gadget hybrid sort of weapon. I mean, they went Ty Montgomery and then moved him to running back, but he never was like that. He was a wide receiver coming out of Stanford. Savion Williams, the 3rd round pick out of TCU, was very much that. He is a pure gadget guy. So just a draft that did not make sense historically for the Packers, but we'll see how it turns out. The most predictable draft, though, on the other hand, was easily the Las Vegas Raiders. So easy, in fact, that I nailed 2 of their top 3 picks in my 3-round mock draft. One, because Ashton Jeanty, just Pete Carroll's love for Ashton Jeanty, obvious. Why? I mean, the guy wants to run the football. He wants an elite running back. It's just been part of his DNA going back to Reggie Bush. He sees how much those guys can make a difference. So that's what he wanted. Got it. Ashton Jeanty. But then Darian Porter in the 3rd round was almost like tongue-in-cheek how much when you talked about Darian Porter, you just said he's a Pete Carroll corner. The quintessential long arms and fast. Long arms and fast. He was Tariq Woolen, former wide receiver, ran a 4.3. So if you go back to my mid-April draft, I nailed 2 of their first 3 picks. It's difficult to do, but it was the most probably anyone's ever gotten a 3rd round pick mock correctly in Darian Porter to the Las Vegas Raiders. So that was what I would call a predictable draft. Draft with the most obvious plan. This one has to go to the San Francisco 49ers. I can't think of a team addressing one aspect of the football game. So like passing offense, rushing offense, passing defense, rushing defense. They specifically addressed the rushing defense. And truly all they did. Their picks. So their top, going through to the 4th round. Mykel Williams, Georgia edge. The best run defending edge in this draft class. Alfred Collins, Texas DT in the second round, pick 43. The best like two gap nose tackle in this draft class. Nick Martin, linebacker, Oklahoma State. One of the best weak side linebackers, the position Dre Greenlaw plays that they just missed. One of the best weak side linebackers against the run this draft class. CJ West, pick 113. Defensive tackle out of Indiana. One of, if not the best, one gap run defenders in this draft class. Like it was all those guys can play the run. And then, oh, by the way, Upton Stout out of Western Kentucky, one of the best slots against the run in this draft class. 5'9", 182, but the guy plays like a dog in the running game. He had a 90.9 run defense grade last year, according to PFF. So all of their first, 5 picks there before Jordan Watkins going offense and then Jordan James after that, who I love. All those guys are going to make an impact on the San Francisco 49ers run defense. You can mark my words that the 49ers will have a much, much better run defense than they did a year ago. I think Shanahan and Lynch were pissed. I think they were. And I think they wanted to fix that very, very quickly. And well, I don't know if you could do much better than what they did, truthfully. They knocked that out the park. It's very one-dimensional in what they did. If any of those guys ever becomes a high-end pass rusher, I'll be surprised. But I think you feel very good about them all being impact run defenders. I will end with these two. Some trades. The best win-win trade, and I said this at the time, I thought about it a little more. I still believe it. I think the Jaguars and Browns trade was the definition of a blockbuster win-win. Now, you can, if you're a Jags fan, I can see being a little hesitant, a little cautious about this. You gave up a ton, right? You gave up a second, a fourth, next year's first, and obviously pick 5. It was to go up only 3 spots, right? That's a lot. You better hope you're good next year and that things don't go south and that you didn't just give up a top 5 or 10 pick. Because you are probably a little bit more than one Travis Hunter away from winning a Super Bowl. There are other needs on this roster, right? But I don't know if we've seen a receiving core like Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter in some time. 2 high-end explosive, big catch radius, all-around supreme athletes with one of the best OCs in the NFL dialing it up, and then obviously a quarterback who's never had that, never had anything close to that, throwing them the football. I just don't think we've seen it. And then the Jags have the added benefit of like Travis Hunter go both ways. So he can truly be, if you add up top wide receiver plus top cornerback contracts, now it's obviously not going to be fair because he's not going to play 100% both ways. But like you start to get close to a quarterback contract, which would justify a trade up like this. So I think it makes sense from the Jaguars' perspective. And I think James Gladstone hit the nail on the head saying like Travis Hunter's a guy we just want to put in this locker room because of the things he can do for a locker room. And I'm uniquely qualified to handle not having first round picks. They won a Super Bowl doing that in Los Angeles. And then from the Browns' perspective, you just had such an expensive roster. You are paying, obviously, Deshaun Watson so much to just go home that you have to find ways to get cheaper. You're not going to be able to resign your entire cornerback group, right? You're not going to be able to keep this together with the cap situation you're in unless you get rookie contracts, guys playing well on rookie contracts. Travis Hunter would be one guy doing it. Now you get 4 guys doing it. You got your entire running back room from this trade in Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson. You got Mason Graham, who can be a Pro Bowler, defensive tackle, one of the best. To me, if I were tiering the top of this class in terms of just like the best prospects, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, 1 tier, Mason Graham in his own tier right below that, and then everyone else in the tier. So you still hit, in my opinion, what I would probably call a blue chip prospect. And then you have a first rounder next year that, again, it's a lottery ticket that could end up being a top 10 pick, a top 20 pick. I think from the Browns' perspective, it was a great, great move. You could debate what they did after that, but the trade itself, a great move. All right, the most lopsided trade in this draft. The Isaac Tesla trade up was wild. 2/3 to go get Tesla. It was like ended up being like a few fourths to go get it. But the wildest one to me was the Houston Texans trading a future third to go get Woody Marks. I couldn't believe this one. I was after they traded down, I was like, oh, okay, they're going to start, building around, trying to get more draft capital, trying to smooth out this roster. I thought specifically this offensive line. But no, they traded a future third to the Miami Dolphins to go up and get Woody Marks, a guy who, is an okay running back. He's definitely a different type of running back. He's much more of a scat back to Joe Mixon's, first and second down back, but he's like a role playing back. He's not even like a lead dog type of back. You drafted him ahead of Dylan Sampson, who I had much higher grade on coming out of Tennessee, similar sorts of backs. And I couldn't believe that he fell to 126. And that's funny because the pick that he gave up, 179, ended up turning to Ollie Gordon, who was for the Miami Dolphins, who was thought of as, a guy, if we did this a year ago, who would have been drafted much higher than Woody Marks. So you went up, traded a future third rounder to get Woody Marks. The pick they got ended up turning to Ollie Gordon. It was just a lot to trade up for one guy in a future third when, again, this was not a great draft class. Next year could be much better. You don't know where you're going to be drafting next year if you're the Houston Texans. Obviously, you think you're going to make the playoffs, but I think everyone thinks you're going to make the playoffs at this point in time. So that, to me, was the most lopsided trade. There you have it. There's your draft superlatives. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of Pushing the Pile. I know I did. It was fun getting back to my solo pod roots. Until next time, keep pushing.